Alright, good evening everybody. This video I want to make, instead of ranting about politics and stuff like that, I want to rant about something else. The consistency will be, of course, the ranting. Obviously. To rant is to live. There's a great Bible verse I found recently, and it's Romans 7:21, I think. Don't quote me on that with ontological certitude, but I'm pretty sure it's true. Do you like that, by the way? Ontological certitude. That's an 8-syllable phrase. I should get an honorary degree for that. But anyway, I think it's Romans 7:21. It says, now this is the Apostle Paul talking. He says, I find this law at work. When I try to do good, evil is right there with me. That verse is amazing to me. First of all, he uses the word law. So that's a pretty strong word, you know? And then when you stop and consider, on top of that, the Apostle Paul was an attorney by trade. He was a lawyer by trade. So, excuse me. So, you know, I don't think, first of all, is the Apostle Paul. So he's a pretty intense guy to begin with. I mean, he's the guy that went around killing Christians. You know, for the first however many years that there were Christians, that Christians even existed. So, so that's pretty intense. You know, he was a powerful guy. I mean, think about it. You got to be powerful to go around killing people. I don't care who you are. I mean, unless you're just like a barbarian. But I mean, this was not a barbarian society. This was, you know, the society of, it was basically Roman society. So think about that. Think about the fact that he was an attorney, he was a lawyer. He sentenced people to death. And then on top of that, he wasn't even a Roman. He was a Jew, right? Now, the Jews were an occupied society. They were occupied by the Romans. So in spite of the fact that he was a subjected minority, I guess you might say. I don't know if the Jews are considered minorities under Roman rule. They were a subjected people, you know? They were subjects. They were subjects of the Roman Empire. And yet, nevertheless, Paul still managed to not have enough power to go around killing people. Not himself, but, you know, sentencing people to death. So, it is, we learned in Sunday school on Sunday that, I mean, I learned it. I guess everybody didn't learn it because I'm assuming some people already knew it, right? But I learned in Sunday school on Sunday that the Apostle Paul was holding people's coats, jackets, cloaks, whatever you call them, when Stephen was being stoned to death. Stephen is a guy, I believe it's in the book of Acts, one of the first followers of Christ. You know, and like all of the first apostles, you know, he was killed for his faith. You know, so the Apostle Paul, his name was Saul at that time. He was there, you know, holding people's cloaks while they were killing this guy. So that's the Apostle Paul. You know, I could go off on a tangent. I kind of want to digress about the fact that all of the initial apostles, all the initial believers were crucified, with the exception of maybe John, I think, who was condemned to a life of isolation on a barren island where he wrote the book of Revelation. He had that experience. Wrote the book of Revelation. I mean, that's just more, you know, you add to the fact, people wonder, why do people take the Bible so seriously? Well, number one, well, not number one, but there's a bunch of reasons. But one of the reasons is because it was written by like about 40 people, you know, who lived 1,500 years apart from each other. They were from 3 different continents. They spoke 3 different languages. Some of them were kings. Some were fishermen. At least one of them was a fisherman. One was a doctor. One was a lawyer. One was a fugitive. Moses was a fugitive, you know, from the law because he was a murderer, you know. Of course, he didn't write parts of the book of the Bible while he was a fugitive. It was later in his life, like 40 years later, but still. You know, some of them were religious people, some were not, you know. So, and then on top of that, you add to that, compounding to that, is the fact that all of these apostles, 10, 11, 12 of them, whatever it was, if you count Stephen, you know, he's not, I don't think Stephen was one of the 12. I'm not sure, but I don't think so. You know, you add to that, all of these guys were killed. They all died. I mean, I'm not an expert in things, but, you know, from what I understand, it's like people don't normally die for something they know isn't true. Or to state that in an even stronger way, people don't usually die. Very rarely will somebody voluntarily give up their life for something that they are not absolutely certain is true. So, to die for a lie is different than dying for something that you don't know with certainty is true, right? I mean, because you could go around running and run around telling people things that you know are not true, which is different than running around telling people things that you think might be true, but you're not certain that they are true, right? So, in either case, people don't usually die. I mean, and then to add to that fact is the fact that 10 or 11 of these guys all simultaneously together died for the same cause. And, you know, it's just, and then the 12th one was subjected to a life of isolation on a what's the word I used before, like a barren island, right? So, I mean, that's pretty amazing. You know, if it's, let's just say for the moment that it's all what they say, it's just interesting moral teachings and it's interesting stories and whatnot and so forth. It's like that. Well, it's like, yeah, but isn't it interesting that they all fit together when they're all written by all these different people from all these different cultures? They were primarily Jewish, obviously. I don't want to misspeak on that note. Not all Jewish, but primarily Jewish. They were all primarily men, not all men, but primarily men. I think maybe there was 2 women. So there were some consistencies, but, you know, you add into the consistencies the diversity of cultures and times and lands and languages. You know, it's just amazing. It's an amazing compilation of writings. You know, and then there was a Jewish mathematician who wrote a book called the Bible Code, where he did analysis, mathematical analysis. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. It's amazing. It goes on and on and on. I mean, the intricate way that it all fits together is just unbelievable, you know. But like we were at, I was at Shannon's church for Christmas Eve, and the guy did Pastor Jeff is his name, did an amazing thing about the Passover and it wasn't Christmas. It was Good Friday. Sorry, it wasn't Christmas Eve. What am I talking about? It was Good Friday. Amazing thing. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And there's a Jewish tradition. I can't remember the word. I think it might be like an echad or something like that. Echad, something. Anyway, it's like a round piece of cloth with 3 pockets, and they put 3 pieces of matzah in there. I mean, the sermon alone took 30 minutes, so I don't want to go into all that, but I mean, it's just unbelievable that the details, the parallels, and it's mind-boggling, really. It's really mind-boggling. And this sermon that James Kennedy did when he was still alive, he's not alive anymore, on the Trinity, I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, this stuff is just blows your mind. But Anyway, so I got off on that tangent. It was an indulgence on my part. I apologize, but I was talking about this Bible verse about the Apostle Paul being an attorney. He says, I find this law at work. I mean, that little thing, that's why you got to read the Bible for yourself, you know? Because honestly, we're an advanced society, and I think what happens in advanced societies, it's not intended to be a slight to anyone or even to any profession. It's just what is. It's just what happens, you know? It's just the way it is. I mean, it's also the reason, I guess, cultures fall, you know? The whole cycle, I forget who coined that cycle of social development, where it's like, you know, birth and growth and struggle and then maturity and then decline and then you know, the whole side, death, and then it starts all over again, you know. But everything just becomes extremely standardized, you know. And even preachers, we're just speaking in a giant lexicon, a giant collection of cliches, you know. Everything just, even when you don't think you're talking in cliches, you're talking in cliches. It's because everything has just become so ridiculously highly standardized, you know, and the sermons are all just canned templates of other sermons, and everybody's just saying the same thing, and they don't even realize it, you know. And so you go to church and you're basically just hearing canned stuff, you know. It's like AP Newswire. It's like there's no such thing as a reporter anymore. They just copy and paste, figuratively or literally, stuff that they get from the AP, or they just sit there in front of the teleprompter and read stuff that came from the AP. You know, it's just all compilation. You know, it's no originality. So you got to read the Bible for yourself, I think, because you find this stuff, like, you know, the stuff that means something to me might not mean anything to you. You know, the stuff that I think is cool, you might think is really lame, or vice versa, you know. And so you go to church and you look to the preacher, the Sunday school teacher, or the commentary, or the publication, the people who create, to tell you what's in the Bible. It's like, well, they're telling you what they think is interesting, you know. And they might be really lame. I mean, they might be lame-o. They may have ulterior motives. You know, maybe they're not even trying to find anything interesting. Maybe they're trying to find something that they think will sell books or fill pews. You know, and it's like, it has nothing to do with inspiration, or has nothing to do with that. It just has to do with making a living. You know, I mean, that's really, I think that's the beginning of the decline for society, is when nobody does anything for passion anymore. People just do things for acceptance and a paycheck, social acceptance and a paycheck. I mean, that's it. I mean, could you think of a better formula, a more obvious formula for decline? I mean, how obvious is that, right? I mean, it's just, you're just a robot at that point in time. You're like a puppet, you know? You're not even like human anymore, really, I don't think. Because doing things for social acceptance and paycheck, I mean, social acceptance is you're just a poodle in a poodle show. You're just trying to win. You're just trying to persuade the judges to hold up a good number, right? I mean, you're not doing anything for out of sincerity. You're not doing anything out of an expression of your true self. You know, you're just doing doing everything to win the approval of the judges. And a paycheck, what is that? If you're working for a paycheck, which we all do, I recognize that. I'm not speaking in absolutes. I'm speaking in relative terms. I mean, we have to. I get that. But if that's the only reason you go to work, right? That's the only reason you do what you do. Well, then what are you? You're a slave, right? I mean, you're doing what you have to do, and there's no element of want. There's no element of personal expression. There's no element of passion in there. You're a slave, you know? Period. I mean, there's no debating that point. You're just a slave, you know? So, and, you know, I define a slave as somebody who, when they are faced with a moral or ethical dilemma, and they have to choose between doing what they genuinely feel is right and doing what they think is safe for their career or safe for their paycheck. Okay, to me, at that point, if you choose the paycheck, then you are literally a slave, you know? And everybody has their breaking point. I understand that. So everything you have to think. I've developed a saying. It says everything nothing is a pole. Nothing is how do you say? Nothing is a I can't think of the term. There's a term for it. Nothing is a pole. Everything is a place on a spectrum. You know, so there's really nobody who's perfectly evil or perfectly good. I mean, there's those of us who strive for one or the other, right? You know, but in reality, we're somewhere on a spectrum, and not only are we on a spectrum, but we're on a spectrum that is itself on a spectrum, right? Because I might be really good at being honest, and I am actually very good. My grandfather was ridiculously honest, to an absurd degree. I won't get into all that, but he was, and that's who I model my life after, is my grandfather. My grandfather on my father's side. Unfortunately, his son didn't pick up that passion for honesty, because my father bragged about being a liar, and it's something that rings in my head, that what he told me one time, you know. But he was also a big NASA man. He was also a big engineering man, so he was a very proud man. And prideful people tend to be liars, because they think that they're above petty constraints, petty moral and ethical constraints. They think it just comes with being arrogant. You know, being a liar comes along with being arrogant, being accomplished, because you think, I'm so good at, it's like a compensation game. I'm really good over here, therefore I can cut corners over here. So my father was, I think that he was so proud of being an engineer. He was so arrogant about being an engineer, which is a whole other subject, because being an engineer is no big deal. There's nothing to be proud of, you know. I mean, Stalin had so many engineers at his disposal. He sent them to the gulags by the tens of thousands. I mean, engineers are a dime a dozen. Engineers are like glorified workers, you know, like factory workers. And in fact, there's a lot of engineers that are literally factory workers. It's just a title on a little desk trinket, you know. I mean, so, but in my father's and mother's era, being an engineer was a big deal, you know. So my father was very proud about it, very arrogant about me. So he was a liar, you know. His father was very humble. He was didn't have much ambition in life. He was a bank clerk, and that's all he ever aspired to be. But he was very humble, and he lived a very honorable, not perfect, but he lived a very honorable life in the way that he conducted his personal affairs. He had some attitudes and stuff that were not very admirable, but you know, in many ways he was very good. You know, he was very devoted to his wife, and you know, anyway. So it's a spectrum of sex. So you know, I'm very good at being honest that way. But the Lord convicted me one day, you know, this spectrum of spectrums. You know, the fact of the matter is, I'm extremely good, not perfect, all right, mind you, but extremely good about being honest about what's happened in the past and what's happening currently. But if I'm a horrible liar when it comes to the future. I mean, that's God's honest truth. If I tell you I'm going to be somewhere at 3, that's a lie. I'm not going to be there at 3. I get there at 3:10, 3:15, 3:30. You know, and the same thing goes for other things in the future. If I say I'm going to do something, it's kind of iffy. You know, I'm just telling you, that's God's honest truth. I mean, see what I'm saying? I'm honest about what is right now or in the past, but in the future, no, I miss that. I'm bad about that, because that's a spectrum, right? Honesty is a you know, it's just like everything's on a spectrum, spectrums and spectrums of spectrums. So anyway, this thing I got off on terror. I'm like digressing like a maniac tonight, but I got to go in too. I'm home. I'm backed in a park. I'm already parked. But so this verse is amazing to me. Because it just explains everything. It explains why the Catholic Church is so overrun with evil. I mean, just the stuff coming out of the Catholic Church is just unbelievable. The Pope's right-hand man has been a sex trafficker, a child sex trafficker for like the last 50 years. He's been convicted in like 115 cases of trafficking little boys for sex. I mean, horrible. Like his what's his title? He's from Australia. It's like a deputy pope or something like that. I mean, and these preachers and these deacons and everything that I grew up with. I mean, it's just crazy stuff goes on. It's just like, and the Apostle Paul explains it right there. Boom. Oh, when I try to do good, evil is right there with me. See, you know what the problem is with the institutionalized churches? These guys, they got to impress their laity, right? They got to impress their constituency, so they have no choice. It's the system, man. Like my hippie friends say, it's the system, man. But it really is true. When money becomes your objective, making that paycheck, cutting corners ethically and morally, just shaving pieces of yourself off to meet other people's approval, to get that big number on that little card like a poodle in a poodle show. Okay? That's it. That's the beginning of the decline. You've reached your peak. You got that title. You got that office. Okay, now it's time to start going downhill. You know? That's the beginning of the decline. You can't do that. See, I mean, with all of my heart and soul, I feel God has called us to a life of struggle and strife. But I mean, the kind of struggle and strife where it's like you're constantly going up, you know? I don't care if you're talking about going up in your bank account, up in your career, up in your personal ethics and personal integrity and personal, you know, it's like just becoming better and better in every area, physically, relationally, you know. That's the life God has called us to. It's those stupid titles is what kills everybody, because they feel like they've reached a landing place and now they just get to coast the rest of their life. It's like, no, you don't get to coast. Your landing place is a challenge to raise the office itself that you have achieved. So all of the struggle and all the strife that you've experienced to get where you are was just practice to keep struggling and striving, not only to take yourself further, but to take the people that you've been put in charge of. So now you've got to climb the mountain that you just climbed, but now you have to do it with 1,000 pounds of people on your back. And you know how hard it is to lead people, I'm sure, if you've ever tried to lead people, which I can't say that I have a lot of experience with that, but, you know, I can only imagine it's hard. It's hard, you know. You conquer yourself not so you can rest and sit on your fat, you know what? You conquer yourself so that you can learn to conquer other people. And I mean conquer people in a good way. I mean lead people, you know, overcome other people's worst impulses, you know. Because when you lead an institution, you become the titular head of an institution. You just became the titular head of a group of people that have as many bad impulses as anybody else does, including you, you know? So it's interesting to me to think about the fact that God is infinite and that we are called to be imitators of God. It's like, wait a minute. Well, then this is an infinite journey, isn't it? I think it is. I think it's an infinite, which means, like I said before, if you achieved an office, a title, that was just practice, you know? Now you got to do the exact same thing, but with 1,000 pounds of gear on your back. You know, it gets harder, but I think the more you go on, the more you learn to enjoy the challenge. And that, to me, that's what it's all about. To me, that's what following God is all about, is to purging yourself of all of that lust for comfort and status and little cards, little judges cards with little numbers on them, the approval of the crowd, so to speak, you know, or the comfort that slavery brings, because slavery does bring a certain amount of comfort, because it's like you're not responsible for anything except what you're told. I mean, there's some comfort in that, you know. You don't have to decide what to do. You're told what to do. Okay, well, that takes a lot off your shoulders right there. It's just like you just go sit under a tree and wait for somebody to tell you what to do. I mean, obviously, there's a downside too, because, you know, but, you know, as long as it's not too bad, as long as your master is nice to you, well, then your food, your housing, your health care, I mean, it's all taken care of, you know. And I'm not talking about like slavery where they beat you. I'm talking about like modern slavery where you just working for a paycheck. You're just doing what you're told because you have no choice. I mean, that's slavery, and you give up your convictions, you give up your identity, you give up your own passion, you give up your own dreams, you give up all that because it's easier just to be a slave, So, a virtual slave, a figurative slave. So, getting back, if I can keep myself on track, obviously I'm not doing very good with that tonight. If I get back to this Bible verse, the Apostle Paul is saying, when I try to do good, evil's right there with you. It's interesting because the Apostle Paul was like the greatest man. He was champion after he got done killing all those Christians, became a Christian himself. He was like a champion of the work of God through Christ, right? And yet, look at his humility. Look at all that he gave up. And you go to these churches, there's no humility. There's no humility in these preachers. Like I said, because they have no choice. They have to be puffed up. They have to be big and bad. They have to act like they have it all under control because that's what their constituency wants. Because you know what? If the preacher has it all under control, that means the constituency can take it easy on themselves because it's like vicarious righteousness. It's like I go to this place and listen to this guy, so I don't have to be that good. But and that is true. I mean, we're all vulnerable to that impulse, and that's a bad impulse because that's the opposite. So that's the cool thing about the Apostle Paul. It's like it's just humility. So the pride is almost like not manufactured, but it's like I don't know how to say it. It's like that's the way the devil works. He corners you. It's not free will. He corners you. I mean, it is free will, but he puts you in a vice and gets you where you want to be. Puts you up in front of all these people with this title and this, and he knows what your impulses are. He knows that your impulse is to be lazy. He knows that your impulse is to look for the easy route. He knows that your impulse is to enjoy the compliments and the big numbers coming from the judges on all the little judges cards, and he knows that you don't want you to be thinking about yourself like you're a poodle in a poodle show because that's not complimentary. So you don't think about the fact that when you start living for other people's approval that you're reducing yourself to something like a poodle in a poodle show, or when these anorexic models walking down a runway, who sacrifice their very bodies to please other people. You're a human sacrifice. You're a living. You're a sacrifice. You're a sacrifice that is giving yourself up for people's lesser. Not like living sacrifice for the glory of God. I'm talking about like a living sacrifice for people's worst impulses, like for a pack of wolves. Like a pack of hungry, salacious wolves that has no concern over you as a person, but who just wants you to be what they want you to be because they need you to be that. It's for their own base impulses that you sacrifice yourself, or that you sacrifice yourself. And I don't mean you like everybody else. I mean like all of humanity. Like we all struggle with these impulses. What I'm trying to say, preachers, yes, but I mean it's anybody in any position of leadership, or basically it's just anybody. I mean because I forget who it was, Benjamin Franklin or somebody said if you inspire anybody to do anything, you're a leader. It's just basically being true to your own identity and being true to yourself. I mean, that's all that I'm talking about, regardless of your title. But I'm talking about the Apostle Paul, and that leads me to naturally think about preachers. But it really applies to any leader, and to not giving in to people's expectations, staying true to your own convictions regardless of the cost. And definitely the Apostle Paul embodied that. I mean, think about it. I mean, it's amazing. The guy, well, like I said, he was crucified, and I think he was the one that asked to be crucified upside down. That could have been Peter, but I think it might have been the Apostle Paul, because he didn't think that he deserved the honor of being crucified like Jesus. I mean, it's just like, it's amazing, But I think we all need humility. I think our leaders need to demonstrate humility, because number one, it frees us to not understand, but to understand that it's okay for us to be faulty. But number two, it also challenges us to not be tempted to try to claim vicarious righteousness. You know, it's like, I'm coming to listen to you talk and you're righteous because you act righteous. Therefore, I'm going to claim your righteousness for myself so I can cut corners over here. You know, it frees us of that temptation. So it's kind of like a double-edged thing there. You know, it's like a duality. It's like a dual benefit or dual advantage. You know, it's like, number one, it frees us, but number two, it frees us from the fear of admitting that we're flawed, and number two, it frees us from the temptation of trying to have vicarious righteousness, which is probably a false righteousness, you know, and puts on us a right burden to constantly check ourselves, you know, to repent on a regular basis. I was blown away by this preacher that came to our church. I was blown away. He said that repentance is, and I have to keep talking about things over and over and over again, because these proud, titled people, you know, even when they come under criticism, they try to just like water off a duck's back and just go on. It's like, no, you need to face these issues, you know. And so I'm just going to keep talking about it forever. I don't care. I see something wrong, I'm going to keep talking about it until it's made right.